Listener warning, may contain tech jargon, dad jokes, and trips down memory lane. It's time for FounderQuest.
Yeah, hopefully my neighbor here won't be too much of a problem for us. It might be muting more than usual. He's a lawyer that apparently was raised, at least part of his life, in Panama. So he's bilingual and does a lot of international kind of law. So he's working with people down in Venezuela, whatever, that want to do import-export stuff. And it's kind of fun listening to him because the walls are thin, right? And so I can hear his calls. And he just blends between English and Spanish all the time. You know, he'll say one phrase in English, then one in Spanish, then back to English. I wish I could be like that. That's pretty cool.
Yeah. I used to have a bail bondsman as a neighbor, and he would play talk radio all day long on a actual, like, it sounded like a detached, like, boombox or something like that. It was pretty great.
I'm always impressed when people can just switch back and forth like that. That's mind-blowing to me that their brain is just fine with either language. Even the times where I learned another language and for a little while could speak another language, my brain just doesn't work that way.
That's because you've tangled it all up with programming languages.
It's very true. And even there, I'm like single language now. I don't even barely do JavaScript, so.
I know. Yeah.
Well, I've been doing a bit more Go lately, speaking of languages, and it's been a lot of fun. I don't really love the friction of getting into Go, you know, coming out of Ruby. Like, Ruby is so easy. You express whatever you want, and it basically works, right? Because it's so fluent as a language. And Go, it's like, nope, can't do that. Nope, can't do that. Nope, can't do that. You really got to do it this way, not that way. But the end result is it's pretty fast. That's nice. And if you never have to touch it again, well, who cares, right? You went through that pain, and now it's super fast. And typically, there's one good way to do it. I know, like Python, there's one way you should do it. And Go is similar in that it's like, this is the happy path, and you should probably stay on this path unless you have really good reasons not to. And then your code looks pretty understandable. So I guess it's kind of like the Rails conventions, you know, where things are where you expect them and things behave like you expect them to. And Go, the language is like that. Oh, okay, it behaves this way. You should look this way, and it's pretty familiar.
It's kind of nice to have those guidelines. And it also can enable language features and IDE things. Go format is like one of my favorite things. Was my favorite thing when I learned Go, and that was back before like we had good Ruby formatting tools. I think at the time it was like Elixir and Go were the ones I was jealous of for their formatting tools. But it's one of those typed languages, you get that benefit of extra completions and things. I liked how I could like just write terrible Go code and then save the file, and it would look like your code basically.
Yep.
I heard somewhere that John has done some Go. I don't know where I heard that, but back in the day, I think it was a big secret. Yeah. Speaking of John Nunemaker is back on the pod with us. We didn't mention that. So the third voice you're hearing, if it sounds familiar, it's because you heard him last week and he's back for more. I guess you like punishment.
Yeah, I'm just tagging along as often as I can, you know? So.
Yeah. Well, we're glad you're here.
So, John, speaking of Go format, I got a question for John about formatting in Ruby. So I know we've kind of standardized on standard here at Honey Badger. How about you? Have you found a linter formatter that you love for Ruby?
You know, I don't. Well, my current mechanism is basically just fix everyone who does it wrong. And so it's literally just John linting standard. I don't know. I used Rubocop for a long time with defaults and then slowly started tweaking them and stuff like that. And that was okay. And then I just got tired of making commits that were like, fix the linter. And so finally I just ripped it all out of Flipper. I did recently, though, because I don't know if it's the Ruby LSP or VS Code or what is the thing that I'm using. But if you have a formatter installed and you're using VS Code, it on save will do like Go format would and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. And I was like, okay, I'm going to try this on a new project. So I tried it on a new project that I was working on, and it was life-changing. It was really great. I mean, I had to tweak a few things that I was like, no, I do not, tab in if to match end when I do assignment on an if. Like, I want it just to flow and not be that way. Mm-hmm. So I had to tweak a few things. And so learning that, before was really painful. Now I got a little AI programmer sitting right there beside me. So I would just be like, how do I do this in Rubocop? And it would be like this. And I was like, this is great. And so now every time I save, everything is formatted perfectly. It was really nice. So I would say I'm a fan. I haven't went back and historically applied it, to stuff that I actually spend the most time working on. Mm-hmm. So at some point I will do that. But
I never was able to get into Rubocop at all. The rules just weren't doing it for me. And I think Josh convinced us to start using standard because Josh was always about linting and having the format. I was kind of the rebel amongst the crowd. I was like, I like my style. I don't want anybody else's style. But standard is pretty close to the style that I had, so I'm good with standard. The only thing that really bugs me about standard is the insistence that you do not indent the private and protected methods. I like that. I like the extra indentation after private or after protected because it really stands out to me. I'm in a big block of private code, right? And not having it indented, I'm like, oh, all right, I can give that one up for the team, you know. But yeah, having VS Code and have the format on save, love it. Just love it. Now I can just type whatever I want and it just does it for me and like, perfect. That's great.
Do you all remember when basically you weren't a true Ruby programmer until you had like whatever your GitHub handle / style guide or whatever we call them, your personal Ruby rules, preferences for writing Ruby code? I wonder if mine might still be on my GitHub. I have to go check that later. Yeah,
and your dot files had to install them as well. Like if you didn't, like you had to, if your dot files didn't install them, then that was bad. So
I do recall, I think I definitely used to prefer single quotes and standard pretty much. I pretty much gave up on all my personal preferences. And that's why I love standard so much because it's like, I just don't want to think about it anymore. I spent way too much time thinking about all of that. And it's nice just not to have to worry about it. And I definitely don't want to argue over like RuboCop rules. So I'm happy to let Justin Searles decide for me.
Yeah.
Does it change other things in your life? Like, do you wear the same T-shirts now or socks or underwear? Or
totally.
like
I've got the closet or, the drawer full of the black T-shirts and socks and underwear, all that stuff.
Well, that reminds me, I have to rant about something regarding standards. And why is it now that you cannot actually buy clothes by the size? Like, I know my waist and I know my inseam, right? And it's been the same for a long time. And I go to buy a pair of pants and they don't fit because the waist is too big or the inseam is wrong. And it's like, what is it? And even I wear jeans, Levi's, all the time. And why is it now that 505s have a different waist or a different inseam? And it's different based on the wash. Like, different washes have different cuts. I don't understand. Why can't we standardize the pants? Sorry, that's my rant.
I will jump on this rant as well. It's not necessarily Levi's for me, but I have run into the same thing with different, even just, I don't want to get too personal about underwear, but even just the color of the underwear gets a different texture. It's just like T-shirts of different colors have a little bit. So I'll only buy like black because I know like the grays, they're just going to be a problem. I totally understand what you're saying. Definitely TMI, but...
On the flip side, it is nice to have variety in the world. And I think standardizing everything like down to the clothing has been tried in the past and it didn't work out too well at like society scale. So it's nice to have all this variation, even though it can be extremely frustrating at times. I like that about Ruby, though. Ruby's kind of the language where if you want, anything you want to do, you can do it your way. You don't have to use standard. I've chosen to pick a tool that will format it for me. But if you want to have opinions in Ruby, you can certainly do that, unlike Python or Go as much.
So you're saying it's like the Burger King of programming languages, right? You can have it your way.
You can have it your way. Exactly. Yeah. I like that the choice exists. Now, inside of that framework, I'm very happy just to not have choices. I guess that's your freedom to have.
I've forgotten about the single quotes. That was my other thing about standard that I didn't love. Because I do prefer the single quotes. Because who wants to shift every time you type a quote mark, right? That's just ridiculous.
Yeah. Well, again, so like the formatting was what changed my mind about single quotes because interpolation works in double quotes and it works everywhere. And once you have format on save, I still write single quotes and I get double quotes. So I don't have to worry about the shift. And as long as you can train yourself to do that.
It is a little weird to train yourself at first because you still find yourself wanting to format and think about it and all those things. And what actually sent me down this route was VS Code was struggling with when I paste. It could not get the indentation right ever. It just never did it right. It was always wrong. I installed plugins that were only about indentation on paste. I just couldn't get it right. And so finally I was like, all right, I'm just going to set up, something to format automatically. I tried standard and I was like, I don't know. I just couldn't quite do it. But eventually I got RuboCop basically doing what I wanted with not too many tweaks. And again, Copilot told me what I needed to do to change it. It was pretty easy. And you don't even have to get it right. You don't have to Google accurately. You can just throw random stuff in there and they're like, yeah, we know what you're talking about. And they fix it for you, which is kind of nice. So
Yeah. Copilot, like AI assistants are really interesting, I think, for just environment configuration and setup. That's a use case that I hadn't really thought about until recently, but it seems like that's a great use case for them and potentially gives people more options, because now it is more feasible to have your own Rubocop configuration where you just kind of tell it what you want and that's what you get.
I was surprised recently. I mean, I've been using Copilot a lot for the past, I don't know, year or so. Whenever it first came out in beta, I started trying it, and I quickly fell in love with it. But I was really surprised using Copilot with Ruby tests. Like in my Rails project, I've got a controller that I just did, or whatever model, I just added a new method. Now I'm going over to my test, because I don't do TDD anymore. I fell off that bandwagon. But now I go to write my test, and I start typing the, whatever, the spec, and within 4 characters, Copilot auto-completes the rest of the test. And oftentimes 2 or 3 more tests, I'm like, yes, that's exactly what I wanted to type. Thank you. Autocomplete, done. And now it's writing 80, 90% of my tests for me. It's just, it blows my mind.
I was wondering where all those tests were coming from.
Thank
Copilot. I love it.
Yep.
Yeah, thank you, thank you, Copilot.
Have you actually selected a class yet and then said, write the test for me?
No.
I did that the other day. That was pretty wild. I mean, it did every permutation that I would have wanted. And I was just, it's another one of those where you just kind of raise your hands and slowly step away, and you're like, okay, this is cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. Are you both, I know Ben's VS Code user now. Are you a VS Code user, John?
I am. I am all about standardization, obviously, other than standardization of standard RV. I need to just do that as well, because even across projects, I like to use the same gems, the same methods, all that kind of, like, everything that can be standard. So I'm definitely for that. And so everybody uses VS Code. It feels like a large percentage. So I gave in, and then I use the Atom key binding so that I didn't actually have to switch. So
nice.
That's the only thing that's different for me.
Yeah, I use the Vim. It has a great Vim plugin or extension that I use when I use VS Code. I've been in NeoVim still lately, but I'll jump back to VS Code or between them occasionally. But I've been using the GitHub, the Copilot chat plugin for NeoVim lately. I tried it in VS Code and it's great, and I wanted to try it in NeoVim, and there's a plugin that someone wrote, and I think it's a third-party one. It's not official from GitHub. But the way they did the interface was really interesting, because they took a very Vim-like approach, like using the paste buffers. So basically you can yank like a block of code, and then I have a binding to bring up the prompt to chat, and I just ask a question about it, and it uses that buffer that the copy goes to, or the code goes to, and it sends that as a context to GitHub Copilot, and then it opens up a split buffer where it puts out the response, and then I can just like literally go over to that buffer and continue chatting at the bottom of the, just writing text in a buffer, basically, like as if it's a file. And then it listens for hitting the return key, and it chats with me like in the file. So it's a very different interface from what the VS Code interface is. It fits into the NeoVim or the Vim workflow really well.
That's neat.
Yeah, interesting that depending on the IDE you use, the user interface is different, or it can be like a unique experience with some of these tools.
Yeah, I'm realizing now as I pair program with people how often I use AI. I didn't notice it. And then I've been helping one person on our team with learning some Rails stuff, more front-end person. And I was like, oh, well, I'll just go to AI. And I'm like, oh my goodness. As a senior, I've been doing this for almost 20 years, whatever. And it's funny to catch myself how much I go over and use the generation and stuff like that. And I wonder what I should just ask him, like, what are you thinking when you see me doing this all the time? Like, do you think, oh, that's smart and that's the right way? Do you think I'm surprised he's using it that much? But I've gotten lazy because I'm like, why would I type this all myself? If it doesn't automatically complete, I just go straight to the chat and I type everything in there. I just had a 2-week period where I forced myself to not use Google. And now I very rarely do.
Are there collaborative, like, is there a workflow for pair programming where the AI becomes like third person in the room, or an assistant that is more collaborative? Because that seems like it would be useful.
Yeah, I feel like I need to watch some more YouTube videos, because I see a lot of people talking about their, but I don't know if they're just talking about actually interacting with it, or if it automatically gets involved, or it's not clear to me on that.
I could see it being pretty interesting once they have like multiplayer for code assistants in your IDEs and things, and if you can remote into someone else's VS Code or use tuple or whatever. but have the assistant as interactive, both of your inputs.
Yeah, with the recent announcement from OpenAI about their new Omni, when, of course, stealing Scarlett Johansson's voice and all that aside.
What the hell?
It could be pretty cool, like having can you imagine like an avatar in a tuple chat? So you got your three-way chat going on and they're just sitting there, or maybe even you just pair with this person, right? It's like a pair buddy without having to have an actual buddy. It's like, okay, for all you friendless developers out there, you can have an AI person in chat with you going over your code. That would be pretty awesome.
Yeah.
Especially if they suggested things. Because I'm like, as you type, you start to get an autocomplete, and that's fantastic. I love that. I don't even use the autocomplete in the editor anymore. But as you're saying that, I'm just thinking of, it literally starts talking to you. It's like, bro, you're doing this the way, nobody does it this way anymore. Like, do this. Oh, I noticed you're using a single quote. Can you just install standard? Like, come on, let me show you how this works. You know, like that would be, I would sign up for that.
Yeah, I want my avatar, my buddy, to be Mr. T persona. That's what I want. Hey, fool.
That'd be cool if you could have personas. Yeah, but you know what that kind of reminded me of as you described it, though, is Clippy.
Yes,
Yeah.
Exactly. I was
It's
thinking
like,
the same thing.
pops up like, all right, have you seen this thing? Like, have you thought about writing this method using this pattern?
Clippy enters a chat. He's like, I see you're writing some authentication code. Have you considered using Devise instead?
Yeah, exactly. Yep. The downside of using Mr. T, I love that idea, but you'd have to, get a Whoop or something and watch your stress levels, because I feel like they would go up. Because I thought it would be hilarious back when the screaming goats were really popular to make my phone the screaming goat. And this was back when I still had my ringer on. Obviously I've never turned my ringer on now. But I was like, my ringer started going off, and literally the cats would start growling. It scared me every time. It was not a good idea. I thought it was. It was not.
And your family really loved it too, I bet.
I'm sure they were, definitely not fans. I was instructed at one point by my wife it was time to change the ringtone. So
It's pretty good. I did,
Nice.
yeah. All the ringtones back when custom ringtones were the
when you
thing.
paid for ringtones.
Yeah.
I know.
99 cents
You
per
know you can
ringtone?
still pay for ringtones in iTunes or whatever
Oh,
it is
no,
now.
I did not.
I saw that the other day. I don't know why, but
So, John, you mentioned you'd like to standardize all the things across all your projects. So have you standardized your approach to blog post writing? Because you have consistently good blog posts.
I do. You know what? I actually thought about it a lot today in preparation, just in case that question came up. And I do have some standards. I didn't realize it until I wrote out, and then I was like, oh, I actually do the same thing every time. And it is kind of a process, but I just hadn't ever formalized it or wrote it down. And so, yeah, I actually do a little bit. So, I mean, I can go through some.
Heck yeah. Lay it on us, man.
All right. So, I wrote out a whole bunch of stuff. I figured first I just talk about the way I go through when I got a blank screen and I'm like, okay, I want to write an article, because usually for you, Ben, you mentioned several weeks ago you had this article you wanted to write. And I feel like it's like food at dinner time. The longer you wait, the worse it is to eat because now it's cold. That's the first tip is the second you feel like I should write it, you just stop what you're doing, swallow what you're chewing, and start writing. That's the best way. There's no better way to describe it than just barf it on the page. I'm just get everything out in. I don't, judge myself. I don't think about the title. I don't a lot of people start with the title and the hook and all this other stuff. I've seen that from famous people, and I'm like, I can't think that way. I just have to just get it all out. So that's my first pass. And usually about halfway through is where I'm starting to see some headings, some idea of these things could be sections and stuff like that. Because my whole goal is you start with this is funny, I didn't think about it. I've never been an artist. I've never, done clay outside of maybe a pot from my mom in second grade. But something where you start with this block and you're constantly reducing it down to this thing that visually is pretty. Because I feel like it's weird to say that my blog posts are pretty or something, but that's really something that I focus on a lot is scannability, because not everybody reads it. And the more scannable it is, the more easy it is to read for the people who read it as well. And so that's the first step, is just get all the marble or the clay onto the page. The second step is start reducing it into more scannable sections and things like that. So usually about halfway through, I notice you're going to say something, Josh, go ahead.
I just wanted to reiterate, I think this whole idea of getting it on the page as soon as inspiration strikes, or as soon as you have the idea, is really key. I was talking to Chris Oliver at RailsConf, actually, and he was talking about a very similar process that he uses for Go Rails, with his videos. So if he's hacking on Hatchbox or whatever, some Rails code or something, Jumpstart maybe, He said that as soon as he sees something that's interesting, he like stops and he records the screencast like right then. And I thought that was really interesting because my approach would be to like, keep like a backlog of ideas for things that are interesting that I could go write about. But it really makes a lot of sense when you have like the energy, when you're excited about something that you just learned, like that's the time to get it out.
Yeah, 100%. And that's a really good way to put it because I feel like, again, I used to do the backlog thing as well. And I can tell you everything that I've put on the backlog is still on the backlog. Like, I don't think I've ever written a post that I put in a backlog. The posts that get written are the ones that I just sit down and I get inspired and go to town. So yeah, that's a good point.
The best things I've done have been like that too.
Yep.
Where you just, get it out. At least the first draft.
Yeah. Yep. So that makes a huge difference. It's just like, have the idea, start writing it. And then the whole time I'm writing it, I'm trying not to judge myself at first at all. I'm not worried about typos. I'm not worried about things. I'll put like almost outline stuff in, so I'll be like, well, I know I want to talk about these things in this order, so I'll just make a bulleted list and then I'll start with the first and that kind of thing. And the structure starts to come in. I know I'm always going to have a few headings, break things up, sometimes a couple of subheadings because you don't want, like, some people do this and I don't know how they do it, but they'll do this wall of text and I still read it. But I can't do that. I feel like if I write this wall of text, people are just like, this is boring. So I can't do it that way. I have to break it up and give it structure and stuff like that. So that's usually the first pass is like, just get it all in there as much as I can. And then after that is the editing process, which, who was it that hates edit? It was Ben that hates editing.
Yeah, I'm the wall of text guy. I will dump it all down there and just have this big, huge, long thing. And Josh is like, I can't read this.
I take it and I give it the structure. And I like that. And I agree with you, John. I think the scannability is really important. I like to even use some formatting like bold and like, like setting up different sections or, try to keep the narrative flowing between headings. And so I think that the structure is really important, especially like on the internet. Like I appreciate the wall of text in some case. Like there's some topics that you just need to like really dive into and you like, it's like a book or something. And you're not going to have hundreds of headings, hopefully. And on it, like actually now that I think of it, I don't like the books that are formatted like blog posts where they have that style. I much prefer the more meaty content in the book. But when I'm reading like a blog post, and especially if it's for like content marketing and for mass audiences, people just they don't have the attention span to sit down and read like 5 dense paragraphs. So I've taken some inspiration from Amy Hoy. I really like the way she writes and others like that. Seth Godin is another good example of like kind of short and well-structured thoughts.
He just guest starred on Billions. I watched an episode that's from like a year ago. Yeah. And he's in a boardroom and he's like, well, it's this and this. And I was like, that's Seth Godin. And my wife was like, okay, whatever. She's like, I don't care.
Yeah. Well, I'm excited for you because I'm a fan. He replied to, I emailed him something I wrote once and he read it and he replied and commented on it. And that was really nice.
That's awesome.
That's the kind of guy he is.
That's the best feeling when that happens. But yeah, it's that, and like you said, the scannability to me is like the slide. It's like the goal. People always talk about in marketing and stuff like that. They're like, you hook them, with the headline or the title, and then the next paragraph hooks them for the next paragraph, which hooks them for the next paragraph. And the whole goal is just to keep them sliding down the article. And I feel like that's what scannability and structure do, is they just give the reader permission to skip some spots instead of leaving. So it might be like, okay, well, this is going to be a lot to read, so I'm just going to leave, Whereas if you have scannability, they can be like, I'm kind of fading out, and now you're pulling me back in. To me, it's like an engagement thing. I just know more people will engage and enjoy it and get more value from it if I spend a little bit of time on it. And it also gives it like a little design aesthetic and stuff, so I feel a little bit like a designer. And so that's the other kind of fun part about it. And the whole time I'm doing it, I try to keep the same voice. And that's part of the reason why I try and write it when I'm like excited, because then I heard this quote and I think it might have been on another podcast, but it was like, content is the transfer of energy. So like when you are writing, the person reading it, they receive energy of some sort from that. And so like even just at RailsConf, Jesper, who we met, it was the first time he had met me and we were about like 10 minutes into knowing each other. And he was like, I've read a lot of your posts, but we've never met before. But now I've met you and he completely understand your writing style now. He's like, you're just the exact same, like writing on your blog as high energy, ridiculous, like whatever kind of a thing. And I thought that was really fascinating to hear because I'm like, that's the almost kind of the state that I'm in when I write the post. Like, I don't write when I'm really bored and unhappy. I write when I'm inspired and I want to tell somebody how awesome something is or something they can learn. And so I think the state that you're in contributes to it, and then thinking about that same voice as you go. So if you started and you weren't in that state, this is kind of meta, but you're writing almost like a boring article, and then at some point you get excited and you start writing it. A lot of times I'll go back up and edit the first part to be like, nope, this is too lame. My vibe has changed, and this is the vibe that I always want, is high energy and silly and enjoyable and stuff. Those are the first passes for editing and stuff like that. I think that comes across, like, at least one person got it. That's all that counts for me. I'm going to take it as a win and say that it did.
Yeah, that's a huge compliment to hear from someone, by the way, that your writing style matches your voice in person. That's a great tip. I love the tip about, if you find the energy at some point in the post, go back and bring it, hoist it, basically, to the rest. Yeah, that's great.
Especially because sometimes it doesn't happen right away. So, like, you might not start with all the energy, but then you get a little ways in, and then you start getting just kind of silly and excited. And so then it's like, well, you got to bring that from the beginning. They're not going to make it to that part. So you have to go back and edit it.
Yeah, especially on some of the articles, there's things where it's more of an exploratory project where I don't know exactly what I'm writing yet. I think that could be really useful, because you start out, you're playing with things and experimenting. And then sometimes I'll actually figure it out, and I start to get into a groove and figure out what I'm trying to say. And then, of course, I'm editing after that. But if you find that energy at some point in that process, you can go back and bring it back up.
So I found when working on a code, like a big PR or something, a big change, I found if I open the PR and then go away for like a day or two and then come back and look at the code again, then I can feel, I feel something different about it. Either I feel more confident, like, okay, yes, this is right. Or I'm like, oh, you know what? I missed this bit or whatever. So I'm curious, do you have some sort of gap between your initial content writing and then your first or second pass of editing to give you that time to bake it? Or do you just knock it all out at one time?
That's a super good point, because I also have that with code. I don't do it with writing at all. I force myself to basically, because if I come back to it later, I've lost the state and I almost have to start all over. It's like when you're working on something programming-wise, you got all these variables in your head and stuff, and then you get interrupted and it goes away and you got to start over again and reload it. And usually there's not a lot of time to write, and so I try and force through it. So sometimes I don't do enough editing passes, and I'm just okay with that. I just know it's better to get out what I did than have it be perfect. So I definitely do not. I try and get it out all in one sitting. And so typically it's an hour or two. Sometimes it might be 3 or 4 hours, but it's usually with like almost, I would say most of the time it's 1 to 3 hours would be typical for any size post that I end up writing. But yeah, that's a really good point that there is. But again, it's like you don't want it to get cold. Once it gets cold,
right.
I mean, it's easier to come back to it if you've written out a lot. So once in a while I will, but
yeah, I like to come back. I agree that it's better just to get it shipped when it's good enough versus trying to sit and edit it forever. But I do like to come back, and a lot of times I'll usually write a lot more than actually goes into the final product. So I'll just write a bunch and then delete. A lot of my editing process is deleting. Like Ben probably can attest to this also when I'm editing other people. It just makes the article better to delete half of it in most cases. That's at least that's my experience. I'll usually come back to it and do like a pass of that, and then maybe it might inspire some new idea or something that I further refine, but try not to do too many passes of that. But yeah, just a few.
Yeah, I think a lot of times the editing is the part like people will either get stuck on or not do it all. Like, it seems a lot of posts out there, it's just like they had a thought, they write it all up, and then they hit publish and walk away. And it's like, well, you didn't think about the other person. Like, who's going to read this? Who's going to receive this? And what would they want, And I think a lot of times, like you're saying, the reduction, like if I had more time, I would have written you a shorter letter kind of style. Like, if the reduction is what makes it better. But then what you can also do is you can add more, like you talked about. So, like, and this is a common thing that I do as well, which is put in headings, subheadings, put in code snippets, put in pictures, diagrams, like anything that I can do to support the text that isn't just more words, to make it hit home a little more. That's almost my first editing pass, is what does it look like? And then my second editing pass is, okay, now it looks nice. How can I reduce the text more and look for errors and things like that? And so that's the second pass. And then how I know when I'm done is usually I'm sick of editing, and that means I'm done. Or like each time you reread it from the beginning, if you're only editing like a few lines to me, that says you're done. If you've read it a couple times and you've only changed a couple lines, you're probably done. If you're changing a lot of lines still, then maybe you're not getting your message across right. But if you're only changing a couple things, I usually feel like, okay, that means it's time to go, and it's just hit publish and fire in the hole.
Yeah, there's definitely a trap. Just the fine tuning that you can do forever. Just like, oh, I don't know. Should I say it this way? Should I say it that way? It's like, if it's a 50-50, just pick one and be done with it.
And I try to, like, just like you said, look at it from a visual standpoint and say, like, where I don't want to bold every inside of every paragraph. I try to not bold more than like 3 or 4 words, and I try to only bold like the keywords. And then I try not to go 2 paragraphs in a row, because then it's like driving a red car. It's going to stand out, like bold is something you kind of just very calmly add. Same with headings. If you only have a heading and then one sentence, that's not enough. You got to have like a few paragraphs in there, just again, so that visually it feels like it flows and pulls down.
Yeah. One of my favorite bolding or formatting techniques, and this is an original, I don't know, I learned it from someone, but you basically don't bold the actual content that you want people to read, but bold the content right before it. So if there's a paragraph that I really want people to pay attention to, I'll write a shorter paragraph that sets up what I'm about to say, and sometimes it'll have a colon at the end, so it's like really clear, like this is the next thing, here's the thing that you should care about. But that oftentimes gets people to read the setup, which makes them want to read the actual paragraph.
Yeah, like a lot of times the first like 3 or 4 words in a paragraph that's important, that's what I'll highlight. Just because it's funny because I didn't write that down. I didn't think of that, but I definitely do that. I think that's a very effective way to do it. I edit from the top to the bottom every time. If I do a significant amount of rewriting, I'll start over at the top again. I won't even keep going down, just because it's about the cohesiveness of the whole article, not about the sections. And so I try not to edit the sections individually. Like, I try to make it re-experience, which is part of the reason why editing gets so tiresome, because you're starting over and these things feel very common and fresh. But it's basically just, it's like, make it more clear, reduce the number of words that you're putting in, make sure that your voice and your personality and that is in there, dad jokes, puns, that kind of stuff, if that's your thing. If it's not, I'm sorry that you live a boring life. So once I'm through like the second time, I just do one last visual thing that's like, okay, how do I feel? How does this look? I think this is good. And then the real thing starts, because you've written it, but now who cares if you wrote it? It's about marketing it, And I know as developers that always feels terrible, but it's that dopamine thing. And you said something earlier that got me thinking of that. It was something I think Ben said, do you leave and then come back? And the reason that I don't leave really is because I want the dopamine hit of publishing it. That's all I'm looking for, is that I want somebody to engage with it, to like it, to ask me a question. And I want that critical feedback. I love feedback. And so if I wait, then it's longer for me to get the feedback. That's my reasoning to basically get it out as fast as possible, is get it out, get the feedback, get the dopamine hit. I immediately open up Plausible. I start, watching my analytics and stuff like that, because I'm like, I want to see that people got interested. And if they don't, then I'm like, man, I just spent 3 hours on this and nothing happened. But what I've started to learn now is, again, marketing is not always a one-time thing. Like you guys were talking about last week or a couple weeks ago, like sometimes it's the 7th time someone sees something that it really hits them.
Yeah.
And so that's the first thing, is put it on Twitter, put it on Mastodon, put it on LinkedIn, all that kind of stuff. Think about an open graph image before that, so that you can, like, when people paste the URL somewhere, it'll have a preview that gives you like an idea of what the article is going to be about. If it's a code thing, again, we're all developers, so that's what I would recommend, is make the open graph image code. Not even close. That has been the most successful thing engagement wise for me. If I use like a picture of myself, it's whatever. And if I use a picture of an AI generated thing, those all just look the same now, Yeah. But if you put in like, this is the key code snippet, people will be like, ooh, okay, they're going to go down the slide.
Yeah, they want to read the code more than they want to read the article.
Exactly. There's a tool called Carbon that will make you a nice code image and stuff like that. So that's what I usually do. I'll copy the best piece of code in there that will fit in like a rectangle open graph image, and then I'll make one with Carbon, and then I'll drop it in. I use Ghost for editing, and I'll drop it in there.
That's cool. Yeah, I've used Carbon too. I like that one. So it makes it pretty easy.
When I'm looking at the Twitter feed or the Mastodon thing and I'm seeing these images for blog posts, I know that those code snippets actually catch my eye, because a lot of times you can see, oh, well, he's talking about, from that code snippet, it's actually clear enough. You can see, oh, he's talking about this thing. And I can say, oh, yeah, I'm interested in that. right? Oh, it's a Ruby thing or it's a Terraform thing or whatever it is, versus like, well, if I saw a snippet of Java code, I'd be like, okay, scrolling right on past that because I don't care.
You ever consider introducing a typo or anti-pattern into the code just for the open graph image?
Clickbait.
Nerd sniping.
I leave invisible characters on and I put tabs in it for the Rubyist. That's what I do.
Yeah, that'll get you some engagements.
Yes. Yeah, so like open graph images, and then it's like you got to other places too. Like if you're a Rubyist, you can go to RubyFlow. That's a common place where people share links. You can very easily get 20, 30 views from there, start picking up some new readers. Have a system where you can allow people to subscribe to updates via email. I know everyone's, I don't want another thing in my email inbox, but it's not true. People, if it's good content that they like, they want it, and they want it right there in front of them. They don't want to go find it, and they don't want the algorithm to send it to them. They want to receive it. So make that easy. Reddit Ruby is actually pretty good. For whatever reason, Reddit Ruby is more links, and Reddit Rails is more like a forum. Like, I'm struggling with this, I don't know how to do that. And I just have noticed that over the time. Reddit Ruby will get reactions, Reddit Rails won't.
I think I've noticed that too. And I've noticed that it's really important to understand each distribution channel down to the subreddit level, because you're right, subreddits do have their own cultures and rules. Everything is unique on Reddit. And so you want to make sure you're engaging each community on its own terms in a way that it expects and prefers. And so I've even noticed that the Rails subreddit that prefers more of the discussion forum style, like you might want to write a little synopsis about the article and start a discussion that then links to the post that can, oftentimes that'll get more stuff and more things happening in the comments and more upvotes, and then versus on the Ruby subreddit where you might just drop the link and that's enough. And if it's a good article, it'll rise to the top. But I think that's important. I think that's like part of what we're talking about here is just having a distribution strategy for your content, which is really important. And that changes depending on the type of content that you're putting out there as well. Like you might have a different distribution strategy for a long tail SEO type article that's the purpose is to get into the search engines. Maybe you don't drop that one on Reddit because Reddit's just going to tear it apart anyway and say it's too surface level or specific or something. Whereas if you have like actual like deeper, I call it in our Notion guide for this, I call it our deep cuts. But like you were talking about last episode, like the deep content that really gets people excited and engaged with it. That's where you're taking it to communities and introducing it to them, whether it's Twitter or Reddit or RubyFlow.
I think sometimes, too, the distribution can be different for the same piece of content, right? So, like, I wrote this blog post about insights, and we were launching that. And it's relatively fluffy piece for the technical crowd because it didn't go into a lot of detail, right? But when I posted a link to it on Reddit, I said, well, this is the blog post, but here's some of the details behind the system, right? We used this and did that. And that was interesting to the people on that subreddit, more so than just here's a link to the blog post about our product, right? So I think there's a little bit of wiggle room there. You can say, okay, maybe this piece of content isn't a direct hit on this audience, but if I give it some color or some background or something, then it's a little more interesting to them and it makes it more relevant to that community.
Yeah, I like that. You can reframe it for that community and it gives you a reason to talk about it.
Yeah, that's definitely something that I have done. I've even changed the title of the link. I'll post the link in and they automatically fill in the title based on whatever title you use. And I'll have like a less clickbaity title on my site because those people are just going to get the email and they're going to read it or they don't. But I might do something that's like a little more mysterious on the Reddit one where they'll click on it either way. Because I'm like, look, I know this is good for you. It's vegetables, but you're going to like it. So just here's a clickbait. But it won't be a clickbait that doesn't deliver. I'll deliver for you, but I'm going to clickbait you into at least clicking on this. But I've noticed like audience adjustments also, like lobsters. Like you have to be more careful on lobsters. They're a lot stricter community. Hacker News, however that works. I've definitely, long time ago had posts do well there, but generally lately, like no one cares about Ruby there. So you don't expect stuff over there as much. So some of those things are good to notice. Like even lobsters, if I post like a blog.flippercloud.io blog post, I could post the exact same post on johnnunemaker.com and like lobsters community would love it. If I post it as Flipper Cloud, sometimes it'll get taken off because they're like, nope, you're just promoting the product.
Reddit does that too.
Yeah. So I haven't had it happen with Reddit. I've heard of that, but it hasn't happened there. They've been more accepting. But yeah, I've definitely had it happen on lobsters. You just got to know, like you said, the culture of the community. What are they okay with? Like, don't just go in there posting all your links, get the vibe for a little while first, and then it gets a little easier to. And again, all of those can add up to, I mean, if you're just starting out and you want the dopamine and you write an article and only your mom subscribed, you're not going to get a lot of dopamine, but those are places where you can throw stuff in and you can get 30 views, 100 views, and sometimes more. And then you start to feel like, okay, somebody has seen this. This wasn't pointless to spend 3 hours writing this up.
Also, email newsletter, like digests, are another place a lot of times will pull from those sources. So if you can get it onto the Ruby or Rails subreddits, then Ruby Weekly picks it up if it was a good article, and you get more, you kind of get some residual effects. And I think like newsletters are another great distribution channel that you can actually, you should have an intentional strategy around these things if you're doing content marketing anyway. So like getting it picked up in newsletters is like the next step.
Content marketing can be for yourself. Like, it doesn't have to be for an app or a product. It can be for yourself. One of the points that I have is like, every good thing that's happened to me in my career is all because of my early Rails Tips days and stuff like that, where I was curious. In 2006, 7, 8, I wrote 160 posts. And so you're talking like almost one post a week for like 3 years. And I guarantee I don't become friends with Chris and PJ and Scott and them without having done that, and then also going to conferences and stuff. But it's perfectly fine to just write those things, put them out. It's not for a product. It's just for yourself, because you might at some point work somewhere or need a better job or have a product to sell or whatever. But like, if you have people that are aware of you, that know you, it just makes everything easier. It makes it easier to go to the conferences, because then people are like, oh yeah, I know you wrote this or you wrote that. Same thing with open source gems and stuff like that. But I thought that was kind of interesting to go back and look at, like the number of posts that I wrote at the beginning. Like, it's easy to just not think about that and be like, but that was literally almost a post a week for like 3 years. And Chris Oliver, I mean, he's a video a week for a long time, And so that kind of consistency, it's not easy, but it's very straightforward to build an audience. If you consistently put content out there for a long time, it will reap massive rewards in the end. Just don't start a business based on that, like have something else and do that on the side until that is big enough to be your thing. I think it's interesting too, though, that like content marketing can be for you or it can be for your product or whatever. It doesn't have to be bad or thought of as just a product thing.
Yeah. You are the product in the case of a personal blog, and there's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah, I did a lot of blogging back in the same time period, 2005, 2006, 2007. And, people get to know you, get to know your voice. And when I then jumped into freelancing 2007, it was relatively easy to convince people I was worth hiring, because there was this whole history of, oh, this guy knows what he's talking about. He's been writing all this. And then when, I started having products to sell, it's like, oh, well, here's an audience that's already been around and they know me. They know the quality of the stuff that I've been talking about. And so that was easy. And then that just kind of snowballed into, okay, now here's a new product I'm working on. And I don't love the whole hustle culture. You got to build your audience kind of thing. I don't necessarily agree that you have to do that. But if you enjoy writing, it's a great way to build some reputation in the community. It's a great way to build connections, like you said, with the GitHub crew, just knowing people and opening up that opportunity for luck to happen, right? Increasing that surface opportunity for those opportunities to come your way is fantastic.
Well, that's how I initially met you, Ben, was through your blog. I emailed you when you made a blog post about looking for contractors, but I was reading your blog because I was a reader of your blog. So, we might not be here recording this today if it weren't for your early content efforts.
Well, there you go.
That's awesome. Yeah, so those are like the main things. It's just like, get it on the page, edit it, slim it down, all that kind of stuff. Consistency goes a long ways. And then there's tons of books. I mean, I read a lot of marketing and story and copywriting books as well. I don't read a ton. Like, my wife will read a book a day. I'll read 15 minutes before I fall asleep. Usually when I drop the Kindle on my face the first time, because I fell asleep, I'll read for 5 more minutes just to get rid of the searing pain. And then I put the Kindle down and I just drift off, and that works for me. So there's Storyworthy, My Life in Advertising by Claude Hopkins is an old one. Ogilvy on advertising, the Boron Letters. It has some questionable stuff in it, but it's got a lot of really good things on how to write, how to influence. Neville Medora has a book that's called This Book Will Teach You to Write Better, and that book is super simple and exactly like the title. I really like it. And then there's some other ones like Adweek Copywriting Handbook, and Copywriter's Handbook. There's a few of those that are interesting to look at too. But just find other people that are either writing about it or stuff like that. And that's an easy way to get better. Like all the information is available to us. Or just ask ChatGPT or Copilot how to be a better writer. And Copilot might say no, but
reading is a great way to be a better writer.
And it's another easy way to build consistency. The more consistency you have in your life, again, like you said, Ben, the bigger your surface area for luck is. Because it's the more days that you'll be out there and someone will have a chance to interact with you, or you'll have a chance to learn something, whether it's reading or writing and stuff.
Yeah, great stuff. Well, thanks, John. Dropping those knowledge bombs. Appreciate that.
Yeah. It was funny. You just like mentioned it, and I was like, oh, maybe I should prep just a tiny bit. And so then I just literally just sat down for 10 minutes and I just wrote everything out. And then I was like, dang, that's kind of cool. Like, I was glad I did that. I wish I had done it a while ago.
You're going to have to drop a blog post now to go with this
I was about to say that, yeah.
You know?
I was thinking the same thing.
I'm excited to do some writing now, too.
Yeah. You got your outline for your blog post now. Yeah.
That's cool. I will say I did the same thing before this episode, and that's one benefit of having a well-documented Notion is that we have content distribution strategies, document that I've worked on, and so I pulled some of those things in, give us some talking points, too.
So one last thing about the combination of Notion and writing when you're in the moment. Like just this morning, I had a thing where I did this thing yesterday, and no one else in the team knows how I did this thing because I was just doing it on my own. And so hopped into Notion, copy pasted my commands from the terminal that I did. And here's how now, if you want to go do this thing, here's how you go do this thing, right? And now it's documented. And if I would have waited a few days, I would have forgotten about it. That never would have been documented. And people would be like, how'd you do that thing? I'm like, I don't remember. Go figure it out, right? So that's another great, even if it's not external, even if it's just internal writing for your team, it's still great because people want to read for your internal stuff just like they want to read for your external stuff. They want to read something interesting, something that's crafted, something that's you have passion and interest about, and that's been well written. So yeah, all these tips can be used even if you have no audience except your teammates.
It's a really good point. We had that at GitHub. We had and actually I miss not having that internal blog now. I'm sure it's not updated anymore. It's long dead. But I was like, I still wrote while I was at GitHub. It was just more internal on PRs and on docs and stuff. And all that writing was lost when I left. For me, I would want to go back to it. So yeah, that's the other thing that I guess to think about is like write it internally, but then whatever, put it in a private gist for yourself or something as well, just so you have it if you need to get back to it, because that is a really good point.
And next time we'll have to talk about note-taking and research apps. Can't get into that now. We're already at almost an hour, so.
Yeah, we got to wrap this one. This has been fantastic. Thanks for chatting with us, John.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It was fun to talk about, and I love you guys. Just have great points every time. I feel like every time I talk with you guys, I'm like, oh, that's a good idea. I got some notes here, so not in a note-taking app though.
We'll do it again.
Cool. Well, this has been FounderQuest. Find us at founderquestpodcast.com and go give us a review and a rating in your podcast platform, and we'll catch you next week.
FounderQuest is a weekly podcast by the founders of Honey Badger. Zero instrumentation, 360-degree coverage of errors, outages, and service degradations for your web apps. If you have a web app, you need it. Available at honeybadger.io. Want more from the founders? Go to founderquestpodcast.com. That's one word, where you can access our huge back catalog of episodes. FounderQuest is available on iTunes, Spotify, and other purveyors of fine podcasts. We'll see you next week.